So I often get the question of what LGBTQ comics I would recommend to people, and I always have trouble picking just one. So I decided to make my life a little easier by making a top 11 list of my favorite LGBTQ comics of all time. Now to be clear, my criteria for this list is that it has to involve themes of queerness or identity in some capacity, or at the very least predominantly star a queer character. It can't just be, oh, it's a standard story, but there's a gay character in it. No, I want to highlight books that present some aspect of the LGBTQ plus community in some meaningful way. With all that said, let's start off with number 11. Number 11, Wind by James Dean IV. Wind is a fun fantasy adventure that stars multiple characters in the LGBTQ community, including the titular Wind, who is a young boy born with magical powers in a city where having those powers is forbidden and punishable by death. When his secret is revealed, he'll need to escape with an unlikely band of companions out of the city and stumble right into the middle of a massive royal conspiracy. But despite how traditionally fantasy that all sounds, the story itself is primarily about how prejudiced societies affect not just people targeted, but also the people at large. How it promotes hateful and false ideologies that do nothing but divide and harm. It internalizes the notion that some people just shouldn't exist, not just in the people hunting for them, but the people being hunted. As such, ideologies can promote shame and self-hatred in a pretty significant way, but it's also about rising above those prejudices both from outside and within, with the support of people who love and care about you. Are the people who see you for who you are and love you even more for being so. It's ultimately a heartwarming fantasy adventure that uses the tropes common with the genre to promote inclusion, acceptance, and fighting back against fascistic forces. Number 10. Heathen by Natasha Altariki. Lesbian Viking Warriors. Oh, you need more? Okay. Heathen stars a Viking woman named Adis who is forced to escape her home after being discovered kissing another woman. As a result, she finds herself searching for the leader of the Valkyries, Brynhild, after she was banished from Asgard after not conforming to Odin's demands. As such, the two work together to defy the king of the gods and find a way to spread equality and compassion throughout the world. Heathen is inherently a story about the power of compassion and kindness, and how, if applied properly, can be a weapon greater than any sword or hammer. Because compassion has the potential to inspire more, and with that inspiration, it can spread like a virus, and start to deprogram the hateful patterns that force people like Idis and Brynhild from denying who they truly are. That's something we need to fight for, because compassion is the first thing those in power try to squash, to eliminate so it can't threaten their rule. But as Heathen points out, the strength to embrace your own identity, to command the power it gives you, and the discipline to apply that power wisely are the strongest tools we can have. And we're going to need them, as the world around us gets darker and full of hate for those just trying to be who they are. Uniting people in kindness and compassion can and will always triumph over hate, if we have the willpower to use it against those who would wish us all harm if we don't conform. It's never an easy battle, but all it takes is one person willing to stand up for what's right to start a fire that can consume the world. Number 9. Infinite Loop by Pierre Collinet. Infinite Loop might be one of the most important books to read during this moment of history. It stars a woman named Teddy, who is a member of a futuristic organization that's tasked with correcting anomalies across time and space. But when one of those anomalies turns out to be a woman, she'll sacrifice everything she believed in to keep her safe. And in the process, she'll learn how to carve out her own path and identity in a system designed to put her in a box from which there's no escape. At its core, Infinite Loop is about rejecting conformity, of rebelling against those forces that seek to suppress and diminish you, that label anything they deem outside the norm as anomalies that need to be corrected. It's about the importance of fighting for your civil rights, for your right to be whoever you want and love whoever you want. It's a constant battle that has been fought for generations, and will need to be fought again, as the people in power once again want to stomp out anything that is deemed outside the expectations of white and straight. No matter where you land on the queer spectrum, there's nothing wrong with you, no matter who tries to convince you otherwise. You have the right to not just exist, but live and flourish outside the controls of the suppressors. And with that, I'd like to end on a quote from Harvey Milk that is presented in the story. Gay brothers and sisters, you must come out. Come out to your parents. I know it is hard and will hurt them, but think about how they'll hurt you in the voting booth. Come out to your neighbors, to your fellow workers, to the people who work there when you eat and shop. Come out only to the people you know, not to anyone else. But most of all, break down the myths, destroy the lies and distortions. For your sake, for their sake, for the sake of the youngsters, coming out is the most political thing you can do. Now, obviously, it's not for me to say what you do or how you do it, or if you choose to risk your own safety or not. I certainly won't blame you if you choose not to, in light of current circumstances. Just know that the choice is yours regardless. And no matter what anyone says, no matter what anyone does, no one will be able to take that choice from you. Number 8. Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me by Mariko Tamaki. Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me is a slice-of-life, coming-of-age story about a teenage girl named Freddie, who finds herself in an on-again, off-again relationship with the titular Laura Dean, who often acts as a nonchalant bad girl and serial womanizer. And through the course of the story, we begin to understand very clearly just how toxic this relationship is, and the damage it is causing Freddie and her closest friends, who are all pretty tired of the constant drama and being left behind the second Laura Dean comes knocking. And what I like about this coming-of-age tale in particular is that it basically serves as an instructions manual aimed at young teenagers of what emotionally abusive relationships look like and how subtle it can be. That it isn't usually this big, loud, explosive thing. It's a series of small things that add up to demoralize you and grow dependent on them to feel good about yourself. It tells the audience what that cycle looks like, how to recognize the signs, and how to value yourself more so you won't be as susceptible to that kind of manipulation. One method in particular, though, is relying on your friends and family who can maybe see things you can't about the situation because you're too close to it. And it's honestly not Freddie's fault that she's stuck in this cycle. Emotional abusers know what they're doing, and they know all the ways to keep you on a leash. But it's only through learning who you can trust and learning how to recognize your own worth that not only can you break away from these cycles, but stop yourself from slipping back into it. It's a wholesome story with lovable characters, gorgeous artwork with unique use of pink, and unapologetically queer, making this one of my favorites. Number 7. Galaxy, the Prettiest Star by Zazia Axelrod. This is another one that's completely unapologetic about its queer intentions and marches forward with complete confidence in its execution. Galaxy the Prettiest Star stars Taylor Brazelli, but this turns out to be only an alias as her real name is Galaxy Crowned, an alien princess on the planet Siende. She's hiding out on Earth because she is one of the last surviving members of her species, after most of them were wiped out by their sworn enemy, the Vane. But hiding out on Earth in a gender that makes her feel tortured and confused every day doesn't appear to be a life at all. Because the life of hiding just can't be fulfilling without the ability to be who you really are. And with the help of her friend Kate, she'll finally find the courage to be the galaxy she always was, and shine all the brighter for it. Extremely overt trans allegory, and it basically dares you to have a problem with it. And part of what makes this book great isn't just the existence of that trans allegory, but how it presents that journey with a few clear warnings about the consequences for being openly trans. Now, to be clear, it still presents it as an absolutely necessary act that all trans people should be able to duplicate. But the reality is, trans people are currently one of the most targeted minority populations in the US. The bigotry is strong and growing, and there's no reality right now where you can be openly trans and not have to worry about how others will treat you, or if some will even choose violence as a means of reinforcing that prejudice. But even with those warnings and the fear that they can cause, the reward of finally being able to present yourself as you really are will always weigh out any negative consequences. Because this is never a case of choice, as some people like to frame it. Being trans isn't a choice, it's who you are. And pretending that you're not trans, that you're not what society has decided you are, can cause years of torment and self-loathing. And many trans people choose to live in that torment rather than be who they are because they fear those consequences. And that's 100% understandable. But when they decide to remove those shackles and be their true selves, it's a beautiful moment that's worthy recognition and celebration. And even now, with the world becoming as dark as it is, I still hope for the day where we can treat these moments for the joyous occasion it truly is. And also, it has a talking corgi. I mean, how could I not put this on the list? Number 6. Fine Print by Stefan Sage. Okay, so there are 2 entries on this list that are not safe for work and should absolutely not be read by anyone under 18. This is the first one. Proceed with caution. Fine Print stars Lauren Thomas, bisexual woman constantly struggling with the loss of love of her life, Matthew. To be clear, he's still very much alive, they just broke up. And after trying to rekindle that relationship ends in disaster, she becomes desperate to numb herself out to the pain of that loss, and try to drown it out in mountains and mountains of sex. But even when that stops working, she turned to the gods and signed a contract with the succubus to have her own personal succubus fulfill her greatest desires. And by a twist of fate, she gets 2, which causes problems for everyone. Fine Print is an excellent examination of sexuality in all its forms, and how it's not a cure for the real heartbreaks of life. That's not to say intimacy of that kind shouldn't be explored, far from it. The book is full of conversation regarding sex and its many implications. Some use it just for fun, some use it for power, some use it for connection, and some use it to try to run from their pain, which is the box Lauren neatly fits into. As her desperation to not feel her heartbreak causes her to recklessly leap from one bad choice after another, seeking a bigger and bigger high. And what makes it interesting is just how much everyone, including the succubi, recognize that something is wrong and they probably shouldn't be doing this. Because while sex can be used and enjoyed for a multitude of reasons, it's not a fix-all, and like chasing any high, it will have consequences the longer you try to run from what's really troubling you. And as cliche as it sounds, the only way out is truly through, meaning we need to be able to sit with ourselves and our pain if we want a chance to see what's on the other side. It's an interesting theme I don't see explored very often, and the way Sage discusses this matter is unique and necessary, all the while creating a nuanced, gorgeous, and extremely horny world for us all to explore, making this a worthy entry to the list. Number 5. Eternity Girl by Magdalene Visaggio. Okay, so this one's a little different from the other entries, as it's not explicitly about queerness. In fact, the story itself surrounds a seemingly immortal woman called Eternity Girl, who is fundamentally changed during her superhero days on the team Alpha 13, and as a result, desperately wants to kill herself and pursues that goal with reckless abandon. But in her inability to do so, she's recruited by an old undead arch-nemesis named Madame Adam to travel through a very Jack Kirby-inspired dimension to destroy the world and herself along with it. And while it might not be explicitly about queerness, trust me, it's there. And it becomes increasingly obvious the more you look at it that this is a trans story. Eternity Girl is a deeply depressed suicidal character who feels trapped in her own body. She doesn't feel like anyone looks at her the same way now that her form has changed. She often feels dehumanized, experiencing constant self-loathing as everyone's attempt to act like their view of her hasn't changed just makes her feel patronized. Nothing is the same, no one seems to accept her, and she has convinced herself that she's pointless. She doesn't even think she's even a real human being. She rejects all attempts at help and won't let anyone convince her that she's worthy of love and acceptance. But as she moves through her journey through anger and pain, she eventually realizes a crucial lesson that changes everything. That we have the power to choose. We can choose to reinvent and reboot our lives into something completely new, into something that's uniquely you. And it's through understanding that choice, through understanding that we are not what society would tell us to be, and through understanding that the new you, the real you, can help you conquer that voice that tells you you are lesser or nothing at all. A voice that convinces you that you're not worthy, that no one can accept you. You are alone. None of that is true. But when you surrender your ability to choose in favor of conforming to standards that hurt you, this is the voice that will dominate, as it does for her. It's a thinly veiled trans allegory that can speak to the pain that comes with doubting that part of yourself, and that it's okay to accept help from the people who care. I also did an entire essay on this one, so you can check out more details if you're interested. Number 4. Crowded by Christopher Sabella. So compared to the other entries on this list, this one doesn't quite directly deal with issues of queerness, but does primarily star queer characters who are not shy about expressing it, so it still qualifies for the list. Crowded stars Charlie, a woman working multiple gig-based jobs in order to get by before she suddenly becomes a target of a Reaper campaign, a crowdfunding assassination app in which anyone can pitch in more money to make a higher bounty. And unfortunately for Charlie, her campaign quickly exceeds $1 million. So enter Vita, a low-ranked bodyguard from the app Defender who is tasked with keeping the most unlikable woman in America alive just long enough to wait out the campaign while all the country seems determined to take her out. I'll admit, Crowded took me a bit to fully warm up to and understand, but once I did, I saw a very brilliant satire on the nature of social media, especially gig-based apps, and how it's fundamentally harmful not only as a way to survive, but in how we treat each other. It's a biting critique on how the obsession of making every job an app, where every aspect of humanity monetizable in favor of actual jobs with benefits, detrimentally separates us more and more from the actual tools and resources that jobs are supposed to provide in favor of making it your own way. And because we're deprived of these valuable resources, medical insurance, retirement benefits, dental, etc., we become more and more desperate for anything that could promise an end to that incredibly stressful cycle. And that desperation is weaponized and glorified, resulting in a society where assassinations become just another part of capitalism that incentivizes people to indulge in their worst instincts at all times. And some even reach a level of fame because of their cruelty and how much of a show they can make out of it. Meanwhile, the government endorses all of this, and it makes it clear they're willing to endorse more, especially if it's in their best interest to make sure something happens to a certain someone. And frankly, I don't think it's a coincidence the main two women being chased for slaughter and money are also openly gay. Because these apps, these social media platforms, inform us all a great deal on what's happening in the world, what's slowly becoming normalized, and what impulses people are willing to delve into the minute society tells them it's okay to do so. All told through some incredible artwork and bombastic action from beginning to end. Number 3. Invisible Kingdom by G. Willow Wilson. Speaking of capitalism, this is another one that highlights more societal issues as opposed to strictly queer issues, but it definitely feels the problems that queer people face every day pretty heavily. So on that note, let's talk about Invisible Kingdom and the relationship between religious organizations and capitalism. Invisible Kingdom stars Vess and Grix. The former is a newly appointed scriptorian who's a firm believer of the teachings of renunciation. The latter is a long-term freighter pilot for the mega corporation Lux, and doing her best to keep herself and her crew afloat even as her job gets harder and harder. But when Vess discovers that the renunciation and Lux have been secretly working together, she'll flee from the church and find her way into Grix's ship. Now the two must go on the run as both organizations want them dead, and decide what, if anything, they can do with the forbidden knowledge they've obtained. Quite frankly, I haven't seen many, if any, stories that are willing to make a direct connection between religious organizations and capitalism, which is amazing because it's incredibly obvious the moment you stop and give it any thought. And that's not good, because it's something we need to examine and talk about more. Invisible Kingdom is a fairly obvious metaphor for how religious organizations and capitalistic forces in the real world complement, support, and build the other up in deeply corrupt ways, and they have done so pretty much from the very beginning. Not everyone is receptive to that particular connection, as it does force people, or Vess in this case, to grapple with their beliefs and what it means in the light of this new knowledge. And thus, Invisible Kingdom provides a pretty thorough breakdown of not just that struggle, but what happens when you try to bring that to the public's attention. Because not only does it put a target on your back, but there's also no guarantee that the public will believe or even acknowledge it, complacent in their increasingly throttled way of life. But even if the public seems ambivalent to the clearly corrupt crisis, it still needs to be fought all the same. You need to understand the depths to which this all goes, how the believers or the public is openly exploited to keep these systems functioning, and redefine what it means to be a believer outside of said organizations. And just like Crowded, I don't think it's a coincidence that the two main leads are openly gay. I think that's part of the message. It's about rising above the religious dogma and practicing what faith means to you. It's a complex topic that Invisible Kingdom tackles with surprising confidence, bringing to light a long-gestating issue that needs to be talked about much more than it actually is. Number 2. Sunstone by Stepan Sage. Okay, so this is the other NSFW entry on this list, coincidentally by the same artist/author, so children, look away. Sunstone stars Lisa and Allie, two women who are deeply into BDSM and have never quite had the opportunity to explore this interest fully. But when a chance online encounter leads to talking for a couple months, the two decide to meet in person and the sparks start flying, sometimes literally. And the rest of the series is very earnest and sincere examination of BDSM relationships, exploring how these relationships are established, what drives them, what experimenting with it looks like, and how to rely on trust and boundaries to make sure everyone involved feels safe, despite the levels these things can get to. And while the entire series is extremely kinky and sexually driven, the one thing I can't say I was expecting was for it to be so wholesome. Despite the overwhelming sexual nature of the series in general, what it basically boils down to is an unconventional love story in which two people happen to find each other in a way that's meaningful to both of them. And the relationship to feel connection feels extremely authentic, with two very likable and well-rounded characters. In fact, every member of the cast, in all various forms of kink, are clearly defined, relatable, and likable in a way that's easy to get invested in. Like, if you were to take out the sex entirely, you'd just have a wonderful story about two lost people finding immediate joy in each other. That's not to imply that the sexual nature of the book can and should be ignored, far from it. It's a crucial element of the story that is obviously very important to Allie and Lisa's characters and personalities. And instead of treating that element as secretly shameful or taboo or different in some way, it goes through great lengths to discuss and educate the audience on exactly how this world works, what's pleasurable about it, and the numerous conversations you need to have to even start, among many other topics. All the difficult and largely considered taboo questions that many of us that are not part of this world have are answered, and they're answered thoroughly, with nuance and respect. It's an extremely unique slice of life book that I found myself adoring in a very short time, and if you're like your kink with a side of character-driven drama, this is just the series for you. Number 1. The Deep Dark by Molly Knox Ostertag. Okay, this is a book I already spoke about extensively in my last list, so I'm going to do my best not to regurgitate what I said there, although I will borrow some of the story description to make things a little easier for myself. The Deep Dark stars Meg, a woman with an unreasonable amount on her plate for such a young age, being tasked with taking care of her ailing grandmother and needing to work part-time to make ends meet. All the while being repeatedly expected to be at the beck and call of whoever needs her, often sacrificing her own needs to do so. Worst of all, being connected to a mysterious creature that her family has kept locked in the basement, who can only be sustained by her blood. Thus, she lives in a perpetual freeze state, never having the desire or the willpower to move past her life's confinements, forced to live out a routine that was forced upon her, and taught that she must sacrifice herself in almost every way in order to keep the peace and maintain the stability. That all changes when her childhood trans friend Nessa comes back to the small desert town and the two manage to reconnect, but it leaves Meg in a difficult position, as she becomes increasingly attached to Nessa, but realizes she'll need to sacrifice her obligations in order to pursue something more. And that kind of sacrifice is just not something Meg feels in any position to do. But through their shared journey, both of them will learn how to absolve each other of their burdens and learn to be happy even if neither thinks they deserve it. And thus, the story is ultimately about coming to terms with all parts of yourself, even the parts you detest, and recognize that there is no such thing as bad parts, just misunderstood ones. It's a dark yet hopeful coming-of-age story that hits me on a very personal level, and still does whenever I look through it again. Because it reminds me of how much I feel I need to keep control of things, control myself, and fear what could happen if I don't. But it's not how we're supposed to live. We're not supposed to lock these parts of ourselves away and treat its existence as a secret. Those parts, like the rest of us, are still worthy of love and acceptance by someone who's willing to understand and accept us, while also acknowledging it's not their job to fix us. Because we are not broken. We just need some support while we figure things out. And it's okay to accept that. It's not shameful or burdensome to accept that. For some people, that's not easy, and it might never be. But if we truly want to move forward to create a life full of color and beauty as opposed to gray and muted, it's necessary, and scary, and wonderful, and freeing to finally let that wall come down. And that's the entirety of our list. Thank you guys so much for following me through in this journey. I hope you find some books that you like, and let me know what books you recommend in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you all next time.